Hey folks, I'm Allison. Welcome to my booktube channel. Today I'm reviewing The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. It is a very interesting novel in that it is kind of three different novels in one novel. It's separated into three parts, and each part has such a different vibe and aesthetic and feel to it. And over the course of the novel, the three different moods of the different parts are really wound together in such a unique and creative way. The novel is set in the Netherlands in the early 1960s, and it focuses on the relationship between two women, Isabel and Eva. Isabel is a single woman in her 30s who lives alone in her childhood home. She has two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, but they have both moved out of the house. Both of her parents have died, and the house is now owned by an uncle who pays essentially a living stipend to Isabel because she doesn't work. They're, I guess, from a sort of upper middle class family, and the expectation is that she will eventually get married and her husband will support her, but there doesn't seem to be any expectation that Isabel will work in the interim. And so she lives off this stipend from her uncle, and the house will eventually go to her older brother when he marries, but he's sort of a player, and so she has been living in the house while he's been off in the city, not interested in settling down in the country. And Isabel, it's not exactly specified, but she clearly has some kind of neurospiciness going on. She's very fixed in rigid routines and is obsessed with all of the items in the house. She has a series of maids that she hires and then fires because she's obsessed with the idea that they're stealing from her, stealing like forks and vases and things from the house. And she, to calm herself, does a lot of getting out items, getting out fancy dishes and cleaning them by hand and putting them away where they go. And she's not good with change, and she's not very good with people. She has a lot of anxiety around social interaction and change. And the novel kicks off when she goes to a dinner with her two brothers. The older brother announces that he has a new girlfriend and that they're in love and they've moved in together into his small apartment, but that he has to go away on a work trip. And since the girlfriend doesn't really have anywhere else to live, he wants her to come stay in their childhood home with Isabel for a few weeks while he's abroad. And the first part of the book really deals with, from Isabel's perspective, the invasion of this new person into her settled life and routine. And this first chapter has a very intense suspense thriller, sort of dark, creepy, what are this person's intentions kind of feel. And we meet Eva, and Isabel perceives her as having sort of two faces. One that is the face that she puts on sort of in public, that is a sort of practiced face, that is the way that she interacts around Isabel's brother. And then the other is a sort of private face. And Isabel, from the beginning, perceives that Eva has a hidden agenda, or something is going on and she's putting on an act for some reason. And so the first part of the book deals with the tension between Isabel feeling basically under threat, basically being very suspicious of Eva and not understanding what her agenda is and what she's after. And then after a sort of period of living in the house together alone, they start to sort of circle around each other, and the second part really transitions into essentially a romance. The two women fall in love, and the sort of middle chunk of the book is about the way that they learn to get to know each other and to accept each other into their lives, and the Eva is always sort of repeating this refrain that, you know, they need to seize the moment because it can't last, because obviously, you know, all of this is taking place in the span of basically a month while they're waiting for Isabel's brother, Eva's boyfriend, to come back and Eva to go essentially move back in with him, probably to his apartment, and eventually maybe they'll get married. And so that center part of the book has this very forbidden, stolen summer romance vibe to it. And then the third part, there's a huge shift. I don't think that I can really describe in detail what happens without massively spoiling a huge sort of payoff of the book. But essentially, we start to really understand things from Eva's perspective. Although the entire book you are in Isabel's perspective, the third part you finally start to get some real understanding into Eva and her motivations. And you also start to see the book situated in the historical context that it takes place. One of the really incredible and fascinating things about this book is that it takes place in essentially the long shadow of the Holocaust. And Wouden does an incredible job of creating this sort of simmering tension throughout the entire book, where you are seeing just little snippets of the way that the Holocaust and the aftermath of that has infected the society and is still having these follow-on effects. But you're not that conscious of it. It reminded me a lot of the way that Ottessa Moshfegh in My Year of Rest and Relaxation sets the book in the shadow of 9/11. You can feel that something's wrong, and you know, because you understand the historical context, you know something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it until the end. And this book does such an incredible job of setting up that tension. And so when you get to the third part, the payoff is really incredible. This book also sets up character in a really fascinating way. As I said, you spend the entire book basically in Isabel's head. But over the course of the book, you come to understand that Isabel is not really a reliable narrator, mostly because she herself lacks an understanding of the things that are happening in the world around her. So Isabel is incredibly sheltered. She lives this very protected upper middle class life, and she also, because of the trauma that she suffered during the war, has really built up a protective shell around herself that she has been able to do because of the sort of privilege of her circumstance. And so when you meet her, she is in this, you know, she's just in this really fixed routine. She sees these people, she does these things, and she, you know, is really closed off to the world. And over the course of the novel, she comes to learn that she now has all of these privileges and benefits that she is only able to have because they were stolen from someone else. And that is a really shocking realization to her. And one of the things that makes this book quite fun is that she reacts to it in a way that makes her quite a likable character. I think she is, throughout the book, despite sort of all of her many foibles and hang-ups, quite a likable character. And because you are in her head and you really only understand the amount that she understands about things as the book progresses, as things are revealed to her, they're also revealed to you as the reader. And as she's having to think through and reevaluate her choices, you as the reader are also having to think through and reevaluate your sympathy for her choices. Fundamentally, Isabel isn't a bad person. She's just acting on incomplete information. And she is acting within a system that bad people have used to bad ends. And as a result, she is essentially perpetuating harm without having to ever know it or do anything about it. And that puts her in a very interesting situation, but also in a situation that is incredibly common, that is probably true of basically everyone. And I absolutely loved that about this book. One of the most poignant repeated themes is the way that good people, people who are following the rules and who are just trying to make the best of their life can essentially close their eyes to the way that their participation in these harmful systems allows them to continue functioning. And then on the other hand, the book also discusses the way that people, even if they themselves would never commit a harm, feel no obligation to rectify harm once it's been committed. And that means that people who have been subjected to horrible atrocities often continue to be subjected to further harms at the hands of systems where people are unwilling to help them. So for instance, one of the things that happened to Jewish people who were stolen from their homes and put in Nazi camps is that they didn't show up to work the next day, they didn't pay their bills, and a lot of them, they lost their jobs because they didn't show up to work. And they lost their homes because they didn't pay their mortgage. And when they got back, their employer said, hey, I hired somebody else in your spot because you weren't here. Or the bank said, we seized your home because you didn't pay your mortgage. And those harms were perpetuated by normal operation of systems, right? You don't show up to work, your boss gives your job to somebody else. That person may not be targeting you specifically out of hate against your religious or ethnic background. But to the extent that that person doesn't feel any obligation to help you, doesn't feel any obligation to make an exception to the normal rule that if you don't show up to work, you get fired, when the reason you didn't show up to work is that the Nazis put you in a camp, right? That it's not my responsibility to help attitude ends up perpetuating harms. On a lighter note, another thing I really loved about this book was the romance. The book centers on a lesbian romance, and unlike very many historical fiction novels, no one suffers and is made to be punished for being gay. The romance has a lot of twists and turns based on the very different personalities of the two women at the core of it, but ultimately the book has somewhat of a happy ending, and I really loved that. I was worried as I was sort of getting deep into this book that it was going to just be really unrelenting and heavy. And I think the balance of the incredibly sad and difficult historical circumstances with the very sweet romance made it really readable, and just I came away from it with such a warm, fuzzy feeling. And I think, there are a lot of books, a lot of literary fiction, historical literary fiction books that explore really deep and hard topics where you come away from them feeling sort of cold and, like you're having a bit of an existential crisis. And this book, because the romance was so sweet and because the two characters are both so likable and because they were such good foils to each other and made such a cute couple, it really helped balance out the book. Basically, I love this book. It was shortlisted for the Women's Fiction Prize in 2025. I think it is a debut novel and it is incredible. I would give it a 10 out of 10. Everyone should read it. It is a novel for this moment in time. It is like a novel that so elegantly just articulates so many things about people and about politics and political movements that I have been thinking about a lot lately. I would really, really recommend this book. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to hear more from me, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you so much for spending some of your one wild and precious life with me watching this video.